Thank you very much, Professor Nachman Ingber. Our next panel will be a discussion with Joel and Ethan Coen about their work with the participation of Israeli filmmakers and scholars. I would like to invite Dr. Orly Lubin, Chair of the Literature Department and Chair of the Porter Institute for Poetics and Semiotics at Tel Aviv University, to moderate the roundtable discussion.
So I guess it's down to business now, and we get to the part where we all get to ask questions. First, the panel. I'd like to invite first Dana Ivgy. As you all know, a film and stage actress with I think already more than 20, although she's young, I'm green with envy. Already more than 20 appearances to her credit. Please take your seat. A true star, wonderful actress. I'd like to invite also Danny Lerner, a director and a screenwriter. Also a graduate of the Department of Film and Television at School of the Arts at Tel Aviv University, where he now teaches. Finally, Dr. Shmulik Duvdevani, who, as you can see, already teaches at the Department of Television and Film in Tel Aviv University, and is a scholar of Israeli cinema and of documentaries, and has a book out, first-person camera about Israeli documentaries, and also is a leading film critic. And now, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming again the 2011 Dan David laureates for the present time dimension in the category of cinema and society, the Coen brothers, Ethel and Joel Coen. If I may abuse the privileges of the moderator and ask the first question. I know you're already shooting a new film because we were told you're exhausted. So what's your next film about? I think there are mics.
Okay. We're not. We're writing right now. We're just coming off the release of True Grit, which we were sort of traveling around with for a while when we were doing, promotion for the movie. But we're not actually shooting anything now. We're writing a script that we hope to be in production sometime early next year.
There's a correction there.
We're always exhausted, which might have led you to believe we were shooting something.
Well, I believe whenever someone is exhausted, then obviously. But you are participating or have been written to other projects that are now being in post-production and production, right? Suburbic, right?
There is a movie that we were hired to write just as a writing job that's being produced now, but we're not making the movie.
Can you tell us about that a bit? About how was it to write a script which you're not then going to produce yourself and not direct yourself?
We've actually done quite a bit of it, just writing for hire, studios hiring us to write scripts. Is this the first one we've written that's actually, we've been paid to write that's actually gotten made? We've written several scripts, and they pay you really well generally, and don't make the movie generally.
Okay, so that and Gambit, right? There's a remake of Gambit.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
It was something we wrote probably 7 or 8 years ago, right? For Universal, and it just sort of disappeared into the maw of the studio. It was in development for many years, and we thought it was a sort of dead issue, along with the 5 or 6 other scripts that we've written that way over the years as rewrites or studio writing assignments, and then it surfaced about, about 6 months ago. It's being shot now by Michael Hoffman in London, but it's a remake of a Michael Caine, Shirley MacLaine movie that was done in like 1967 or 66.
And it felt the same like writing this remake as writing the remake of True Grit, or because you were not going to do it, was it totally different?
I'm sorry, True Grit was actually a project the difference with True Grit was that was a project that we initiated. So we were both had familiar with the novel, not so much the earlier movie. But we were familiar enough with the earlier movie from distant recollection to feel that it might bear remaking. So we brought that to the studio that owned it, which was Paramount, and asked them if they'd be interested. So that progressed more from our own initiative as a remake than this other movie that Michael Hoffman's making.
Okay, Danny, would you like to go ahead?
Thank you. In your fourth film, Barton Fink, the hero is a New York playwright who comes to Hollywood to write a commercial studio genre movie. During the course of the film, he finds himself in an inner struggle to find meaning in his work. On one hand, he is dictated by the studio about what he is required to write, which is a very ordinary, by-the-numbers formula movie. On the other hand, he tries to bring his own point of view, his own unique voice to his writing. Looking at your films, you've made films in several different genres with big-name stars and increasing budgets, but you seem to have found a way to combine genre into your own unique storytelling style. What I would like to ask is, what did Hollywood mean to you before you became filmmakers? And did that meaning change for you along the way? And also, in your own opinion, how can a filmmaker's personal vision be reconciled with the commercial requirements of Hollywood?
Well, that's really interesting. What did Hollywood mean to us before we were filmmakers? I don't know that we thought about it that much. It was very abstract. And I think even when we started making movies, we always, at least to a certain degree, we always sort of felt and expected that we would be quite a bit outside of what you sort of call Hollywood in quotation marks. I think over the years we've become part of that machinery, but more to our surprise than by design. I don't know. I'm not sure if your feeling about it is any different.
No, it's a funny question because the answer kind of has two sides. There's that in terms of the business, the industry. We never really imagined that we would be part of it, as Joel says. And yet in terms of taste, I think we probably always thought of ourselves as being, not even that we thought about ourselves in these terms, but we always were kind of conservative in terms of storytelling, in terms of, our thinking about movies. For us, movies generally are Hollywood movies. That's how we think about stories. So actually, kind of, in spite of ourselves, we think of ourselves as being very conventional, and I think we think about it in really conventional terms, storytelling, that is, or the kinds of stories we do, and yet somehow we can't help ourselves in something that keeps them usually from being really commercially successful, sneaks in somewhere, and that's definitely not by design, but that's...
But do you feel that these aspects do come into the projects that you might take, like the project you just mentioned, Gambit, which sounds like a more commercial film?
Well, Gambit was, we do... At one point, Ethan said to me, he said, the movies that we make are just loss leaders for the writing jobs that we get, which is kind of true. I mean, we recognize that as early on as a way of sort of working within the industry in between movies that we've done. But those are basically, we consider ourselves in a certain respect sort of professional screenwriters in a system that we get assignments by studios, and we are basically, in those cases, we approach it somewhat differently. We just, as writers, we go to the producer and we say, essentially, what's the mandate here? What do you want us to do? Do you want us to, is this a script you want rewritten? Do you want it rewritten from the ground up? Do you want it polished, just the dialogue? We're kind of servants of the system in that respect and are happy to do it. It's fun. But we don't quite write our own scripts from the same mindset. It's a little bit different.
It's funny, just because in the case of Gambit, the mandate was what the studio wanted was very specific. It was, as Joel said, 7 or 8 years ago, and Hugh Grant was it was very big then. He's working less now, but he was very big at the time, and we had a mandate to write a movie with the central character being Hugh Grant, which we did. And it was really remarkable because we handed it into the studio. They were pleased with it. They told us they were sending it to Hugh, who must be a very fast reader, because a half hour later the studio told us that Hugh had passed. And that's actually why it's, I think, languished for 7 or 8 years.
Actually, it all speaks to the same issue, whether or not we're able to write within that system. There was something, I think Hugh Grant may have smelled something bad about this, suspicious. Yes, it's actually now being made with, it's Colin Firth, right? Yeah. So.
Colin Firth. Dana, would you like?
Yes. I wanted to ask you about your supporting characters. I will never forget one supporting character or two from each one of your films, and they're always so well, I don't know, they're remembered well, and they're defined so well in like a few seconds, and I wanted to know how you define them and how you work with the actors about them.
Well, it's a very broad question. I mean, in certain respects, you can sort of divide them into supporting characters which really have substantial roles in the movie, which we essentially just, approach like we would any other character. That is to say, some of them we write for specific actors, excuse me, and some of them we just go through a casting process and find who we want and approach it that way. Many, just because of the sort of exigencies of low-budget production, which we've been involved in for so many years, very small characters in movies are generally cast locally. So whatever community we're in, sort of shooting the movie, we look for people that are interesting and cast them locally. That's more of a production sort of answer to your question as opposed to a writing answer.
I mean, like the two girls in Fargo that she interviews and are like...
Yeah. Right, both local girls from Minnesota. Yeah, they were a riot.
So a lot depends on your locations, actually, on where you filmed the film?
Depends on the location, yeah. I mean, they were yeah. No, thank you. They were local Minnesota girls. One of them was, I think, a stand-up there, and one of them was an actress, a local actress. Most of the subsidiary characters in that movie were from Minnesota. Minneapolis, that area happens to have a very strong, this isn't true everywhere in the United States, and it's certainly not true with most cities that size, but that has an extraordinarily deep acting community, actually.
Yeah. And I wanted to ask generally about how you work with actors. It feels that you put them inside your mind, because every actor will always act differently than they usually do in your films. And I wanted to know, is there something you do to get them into this world, or is it just the script, or what do you go through with an actor that you've never worked before and you want to start working with?
We don't, I was going to say we don't talk to the actors much But that's not true. We're happy to chat with the actors about things unrelated to work. It's, you know, I think like 90% of it is casting, deciding who you want to sort of, who kind of makes sense for the part. And then the actors, you know, generally just, you've chosen them and they've chosen to do the movie because they have some affinity for the part or feel for the part. It's important sometimes, although not even this always, we rehearse a little bit usually before we start shooting so that all the actors, more of this than for us to hear it is so that all the actors can see what the other actors are doing so that they're all in the same world. But really, to answer your question, in terms of like actively guiding actors as directors, we don't do it much.
Most of your films are originally based on original screenplays, yet you've adapted some literary works, such as No Country for Old Men and True Grit, in which you actually kept much of the original dialogue in your screenplay. I would like to ask two questions in one. First of all, how do you see adaptation? How do you consider the work of adaptation? And secondly, what fascinates you in a literary work when you decide that you want to make it into a film?
I'm sorry, the last part was what fascinates us in a literary work that makes us want to
when you read a book and you decide that you make.
Well, you know, it's a strange mix of. Well, first of all, I want to say that of the two novels that we've adapted, one of them was brought to us by a producer, and one of them we essentially brought to the studio. We actually adapted another novel, a novel by an American poet named James Dickey called To the White Sea that we were planning to make in Japan about 10 years ago, but the production never got off the ground. That was also a novel that was brought to us by a producer, although in that case I think we both just happened to have read the novel earlier. I know I had. But I think it's a combination of some kind of affinity with the material, which is obvious, but also, to a certain extent, it's also the feeling that this is something that you couldn't have written yourself. That it's interesting to you, but you actually, it's beyond your sort of creative, it's outside of your sort of creative wheelhouse in terms of being able to have done this yourself. And for that reason, it's got to be different enough such that you go, I couldn't have come up with this, but I want to make it into a movie. I couldn't have come up with this as a story, but I want to make it into a movie. And the fact that you couldn't have come up with it is part of the attraction. So it's a balance between those two things.
Because it's strange, because when you read Cormac McCarthy's No Country for Old Men or Charles Porty's True Grit, it actually reads as if it was written by the Coen brothers. I mean, the dialogues.
Yeah, well, that might strike a third party, but wouldn't have struck us. All that struck us was, oh, this reads like, this sounds good. We could chop some wood with this in terms of making a movie. Both of those novels, actually, interestingly, among Cormac McCarthy's novels, the one that we adapted was the most, among his novels, the most like a kind of genre piece. It was a chase story, a pursuit story, and just, I think largely for that reason, you know, we've read all of Cormac's stuff and liked all of it, but that particularly seemed suitable, well suited to having a movie made from it. And similarly, Charles Portis, the guy who wrote True Grit, wrote 4 other novels, all of which are great, very funny, but also not genre novels to the extent even that True Grit is, although calling that a genre novel is a little, pushing it a little bit, but it's again a story that it seemed like was amenable to having a movie made from it in a way that his other novels aren't.
On the other hand, the James Dickey novel is about an American airman, a tail gunner in a B-29 who's shot down over Tokyo the night before the firebombing of Tokyo, and is in Tokyo during the firestorm, and he walks subsequently from Hokkaido, the big island, from Honshu to Hokkaido. That movie had after the first 10 minutes, there's no dialogue in that movie whatsoever. He doesn't speak Japanese. He's hiding from the Japanese. So it's essentially a movie without dialogue. And that's something we never would have. Writing a movie without dialogue is not something we do on our own hook. And that, again, that's sort of an illustration of what was so interesting to us about it, was the opportunity to make a movie that had no dialogue whatsoever. So, it's a complicated sort of question, and it's different, but it's about a balance.
Okay, I'm going to get one of the mics here.
Oh, sorry. I'm sorry.
They didn't supply us with enough mics. I'd like to ask you about the way you do work together. Is it because of that, because you have to work, the two of you together, that you are so well planned beforehand? That's the way it's described in your biographies, or not autobiography, biographies or interviews. You have a very strict storyboard. You know exactly what you want to do. You know exactly. Or we saw that with Nachman Ingber's discussion about the way even the actors are talking about how they would like to follow exactly what you write, even the silences. And I've read somewhere that you always write, or not always, but usually you write with an actor or an actress in mind already. You might not necessarily, well, I believe you wanted Hugh Grant, and you won't not necessarily get them, but you have them in mind. So is that part of because you work together, or is that forced on you? Is that enforced on you, or is that something that you find better for you because you're the two of you, or is that a way you would recommend of filming?
Well, it's certainly the case that, I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, but it's certainly the case that having gone through the exercise of writing the script together, sometimes thinking about a specific actor for specific parts, sometimes not, but having gone through that process and having gone through the process of storyboarding the movie together, which we adhered to sometimes strictly and sometimes not. But at any rate, having done those two things together, by the time we're actually making the movie, we're thinking about the movie in the same way, very much in the same way, or we wouldn't have gotten that far. So that, when things come up that are unexpected, or we diverge from the storyboards or the plans in ways that we couldn't have foreseen, we're just still generally in agreement because we've gone through that exercise of preparing the movie together. So.
Dan, you want to carry on?
When you grew up, did you always plan to work together? And did you always dream to be filmmakers? And what would you do if you were not filmmakers?
No, I don't think it ever occurred to us that we would work together until we started writing the script that became our first movie. So that was after we'd both gotten out of college and we're quite a bit older. What would we be doing if we weren't making movies? Boy. It's a funny question only because, and actually it gives the lie a little bit to what I just said, because in a way, I mean, even as kids, we were making little Super 8 movies together. We've done that since we were teenagers, really. So, I mean, you wouldn't glorify it by saying we were working together. I'm not sure you would even glorify what we do now as saying calling it work. But that makes it hard to sort of imagine what we might be doing had we not been lucky enough to continue goofing off.
Yeah. Your films often raise debates for some kind of nihilistic approach and some kind of terminal misanthropy, which I refer mainly for films like A Serious Man, the ending of A Serious Man especially. I'm sure maybe you've been asked that question many times, but do you consider your approach to your characters as misanthropy, or I might put it another way, do you like your characters?
Do you?
Well, I just want to say that, during the introduction, Professor Ingberg mentioned that we were polished our characters, and I actually thought that he said we punished our characters, which is actually pretty accurate. We do have a tendency to punish our characters. It's the question.
But why?
Because it makes for, I don't know, it's dramatic. It makes for stories. It's whether or not you like your characters is almost not a question that applies. You don't, they're fiction. So you stand in a somewhat different relation to them, obviously, than you would to real people. And so all those things about liking or not liking are slightly outside. The characters are part of something larger that you're sort of constructing.
Right, the characters are part of a story. They're not, a story that we invent. They're not people we've met on the street. And, just in terms of our thinking, I can't imagine, there must be examples, but I can't imagine, and it's not how we work, I can't imagine a story where, nothing bad happens to the characters. What would such a story be? And if something bad happens to a character, if that's interesting, then something even worse happening would be more interesting.
I wanted to ask, how do you keep your work so fresh when you're so planned? And is there any room for you as directors to improvise on set? If something's not working the way you thought it would?
Oh, it happens all the time. I mean, I know we have or maybe it's well-deserved. I don't know. We can't compare ourselves to other people. A reputation as being sort of more controlling than most. I'm not sure that's true. We work with really good actors who, as I said, we pretty much leave alone. We really trust. We really enjoy watching them work. Things, in spite of your efforts at control, always go wrong in small ways and big ways that you can't foresee. And, in a way that's a good thing because it makes it all more organic. You have to adjust, and the whole thing is more, it's a more organic process than our reputations as control freaks might suggest. So, it's always fresh to us in as much as everyday shooting is, it's never what you expect. In a good way and a bad way. Never what you expect in terms of the performers are fun to watch in ways that you hadn't imagined, and, weird constraints that you could never have foreseen come up. It's just the nature of making movies.
And how can you be so fearless to try different things and styles and not care about, I don't know, prestige, or just do whatever you want all the time?
Well, we started, I think a large part of the answer is we started as kids having nothing to lose. We weren't professional anything. So we made a movie kind of for the hell of it. And we're lucky enough that it was successful enough that we could make a second movie and just proceeded in that same spirit.
Is it true, before filming your first film, Blood Simple, that you shot a trailer for the film?
We shot a trailer. We were good friends with Sam Raimi, who makes the Spider-Man movies, and at the time that we met him, he was making very low-budget horror films. And we sort of copied a model that Sam had used to raise the money for his first movie, which was to make essentially a piece of film. In his case, it was sort of a short version of the movie he was about to make. And in our case, and show it to prospective investors. That's what he did. In our case, it was a trailer, sort of like a coming attractions, 2 minutes of film for the movie that we wanted to make that we would show prospective investors. We didn't know who was going to be in the movie yet, so we couldn't show any actors' faces, which presented, it was an interesting constraint. But we did something that was sort of a little bit abstract, but managed to get the point across.
Would you recommend this method for future young filmmakers?
Pardon me?
Would you recommend this method of putting the trailer before?
It's all about the economic sort of situation you're doing it in. I mean, we were in a very particular, in the United States, you could sort of do that at the time. You could raise money independently that way. I don't know how much it applies either to other countries or to even the U.S. at the present time. I'm not sure, because we're pretty far removed from that at the moment, but it worked.
Again, that's a question that I'm sure you've been asked several times, but how did you get to Roderick Gaines as editors when you credit yourselves? And what happens when he wins an Academy Award one day?
Oh, he was nominated once. It was very exciting. We cut the movie. He was nominated twice? Yeah. Oh, wow. He's good. We cut the movies ourselves under the pseudonym Roderick Gaines. We decided to take that pseudonym as editors because our names are already on the credits so many times we thought it was verging on bad taste. I only remember the first time he was nominated for an Academy Award. The Academy contacted us and asked us what we wanted to do in the event that he won, because they have a rule against proxies accepting, ever since the Marlon Brando had the Native American accept on his behalf. We wanted them to just, instead of showing the editor, to superimpose a big question mark on the screen like the Riddler in Batman. But they didn't want to do that. I can't remember what we decided. In the event, he didn't win, so it wasn't an issue. We were going to bring Albert Finney over, weren't we? We were going to prevail on Albert Finney to come over and be Roderick Gaines, but that he was busy. And I can't remember how it was resolved, but it became academic.
What other art inspires you, except from cinema?
What, pardon me?
Art. Like something that is not cinema that inspires your work.
We both read lots of literature. I don't know. We're like everybody else. We read. Our mother was an art historian. We've been, looked at painting since we were very small. Music, I mean, sometimes when we're, writing something proceeds from a particular piece of music or kind of music, or at least it informs it significantly as we're writing something. That's been the case in a number of movies that we've done. So, I mean, I don't think anything sort of, I think it's, in a way, it's a fairly common. I mean, like everyone else, we're sort of, you take elements from the culture at large.
You're often being quoted as saying that you do everything for fun. You just enjoy it. You do it for the fun of it. And usually when you're, not usually, but sometimes when you're asked about a specific movie and what is it all about, you say, we don't really know. It's not about something. It's just a story that we enjoy. So do you feel that there's any connection between the category of cinema and society and the films that you make that you might want to maybe point out at this point?
You might want to make people
point out that Anything about Americana, social life, society?
No, I can honestly say no, never.
Where's the check?
That doesn't, other people can make of the stories what they will, but no, there's no commentary built in. Our movies are imbued with Americana, if you want to call it that, because we're Americans and we have just internalized all that. And when we think about stories, they're American stories with American characters. And no doubt to an outsider, and maybe to some Americans, it represents, I don't know, a statement about the picture as opposed to just the picture itself. But, the picture itself, the story itself is all we're thinking about.
So I must read to you something that you know about your second theater, not theater piece, but theater 3 pieces, Offices. Okay, so you had the first theater thing that you wrote was both were produced by the Atlantic Theater Company, and they came out with for Offices. They came out with this what they call the thrust of the plays. Okay. Hiring and firing are anti-social acts. Workplace pressures make for nasty competition, and the work itself can be meaningless and alienating. Accordingly, the 3 short plays that make up Offices are comedies. So, and yourself you're quoted to say that working as a typist in Macy's was as close to Melville's Bartleby as one can get. So there is something about how you feel. David Danby talks about how you deal with stupidity, with how people make stupid mistakes and how people are doing things without thinking about them. So all of that is what we read after the fact. Fine. Do you read it after the fact in your films, even if you don't plan that, or do you not even read it after the fact?
Not even after the fact, except in forests such as this when people try to make us.
Well, I promise I will not put this title.
No, it's natural to ask, but it's the honest answer is the honest answer.
Don't worry about it. I won't do the Big Lebowski and Paul Deman historicizing irony and ironizing historicism. That I won't do, but,
I think it's really a question of, the difference between where you proceed as when you're sitting down to write a story and where you proceed when you're sitting down to look at a story or read a story. And, you have David Denby, for instance, or whoever might be writing about it that's his job, is to sit down and look at something, take in the story, and then write what he thinks about it, or whether it's intention, from any point of view, from whatever point of view he chooses. I mean, he's completely free to. But, we sit down, but the mistake might be trying to attribute the same motivations or the same genesis in terms of the idea from the people who sat down to sort of come up with the story in the first place. I mean, that's the mistake that you can make. So if you say, what is the relationship of our stories to, society, we honestly say, well, you know what? We don't actually think about society when we sit down and write the stories. It's the last thing on our mind. I mean, it's much more common that it's something like what you were asking about. It might be a piece of music, or it's a character that we've met, or somebody that we know, and that's what leads to the story proceeds from there. And whatever else it reflects is, we're happy to have people look at it however they please, but we resist the impulse that a lot of people often have to sort of attribute all those things to being conscious places where the story began.
Yeah, no, that's very right. Yes, when we're writing, we're trying to make you're trying to make everything. The whole exercise is trying to make everything, writing and making the movie. You're trying to make everything as specific as possible. Defining the character is thinking about specifically what makes him that character, how he expresses himself, how he looks. Everything is, all your energy is directed to thinking along those lines of how to make him specifically something, so it's a character. And all the impulses to generalize are, as Joel is saying, very after-the-fact things. Not only after the fact, but after the fact for other people. It just represents a completely different posture towards the story than the one not only the one we have, the one we have to have. That's how you make it up, by making it, again, specific.
Another way of, not to belabor this, but another way of looking at it is that, again, the sort of impulse that begins a story can have the fact that, it's been pointed out, we do lots of period movies. We do lots of movies that take place in different regions in the United States. And ex post facto, people often look at those things and go, well, they're commenting about this area, or it's about these different places in the U.S., this different sort of look at Americana, or it's a different look at the history of America, But from our point of view, interestingly, it can proceed, it can start from just the exoticism of it, and what the exoticism sort of lends to the story. And your affinity for that, or what attracts you to that, might be completely aesthetic. So then you look at it afterwards and you go, well, that was all just an aesthetic attraction as opposed to an historical one or a sociological one. And so it seems curious. Not to say that you can't look at it that way. If people choose to look at it that way, it's fine. It's just not necessarily what we were thinking about.
I'd like to ask, relating to that remark, I'd like to ask something about True Grit. Because when the first film came out, it was kind of a reactionary film. Also as a Western, but also poking fun at John Wayne's image. And then when you are making your own version, it's more like a conservative Western. When watching your films, most of your films are also a comment on American genres. For example, the film noir, the screwball comedy, or for example, the gangster film, the 1930s gangster film. There is also something that you are presenting a cynical approach towards this genre. And suddenly, when watching True Grit, there's actually something very conservative regarding your relation to the genre. Moreover, the film opens on Christmas. It's rated, I think, PG-13, which is something that is totally not related to your work up until now.
Actually, Oh Brother was also released, not Christmas Day, but a day before or something like that. So, and may have been PG-13, actually. Yeah. But no, I understand what you're saying. Yeah.
It's kind of, in a way, it's the same issue. You say our other movies are comments on different genres, but in our minds, they're examples of different genres with no comment. They might seem like comments because they're failed examples of different genres, again, because we can't help ourselves. But True Grit is different for another reason. It doesn't have to do with genre. It's just it grew out of, as did No Country for Old Men, it grew out of an enthusiasm for a specific book, and we just, as in No Country for Old Men, wanted to be faithful to the book. We wanted to serve that thing that attracted us to the book.
What attracted you to the book?
Specific things. It has three very great, three great central characters. It had a very strong, which is, again, what made it attractive for us to try to turn into a movie, a very strong, simple story, a revenge pursuit story, and three really interesting characters. And probably this also, the main character, there's something fascinating about it being a 14-year-old girl, and that it's told through her point of view, and that she narrates the story in the book as a very strong and very funny narrative voice, and no doubt a large part of what attracted us to it was we do have a weakness for that, you know, narration, people, the frame for the story.
Okay, so which character of your movies do you like best? Which movie do you like best? Which location do you like best?
You know, generally, you like best the one that you're writing, the one you haven't actually screwed up by making it yet. It's because, you know, when you're writing it, you can imagine it as being perfect. It's, quite honestly, we don't revisit our movies. We revisit them very, very infrequently after they're made, which is why it's always a bit of a shock to see clips from them. We don't look at them generally after they've been released. So I actually think that's, you know, it's the one you haven't made yet.
How can you make a movie in a year? Like True Grit, it looks complex. I mean, in only 1 year.
That's a really good question. It almost killed us. I'm glad you said that because I thought, you know, nobody would notice that it was a really hard movie to make. And we made it very quickly. We actually made it quickly because to satisfy the studio's release date. The studio wanted the movie at Christmas. For weather reasons, we had to shoot in the spring into summer. And we finished it very, very quickly by our standards because unlike most people who have an editor working while they're shooting, we only start cutting since we're the editors once the shooting is finished. The movie was, in terms of production, actually in terms of pretty much everything, a nightmare to make. And the schedule is a large part of the reason why it was a nightmare to make. So the answer to your question, how did we do it in a year? Not by choice. It was a mandate from the studio, and it almost killed us. It was by far the most difficult movie we've made.
When you find a story that you want to tell, what is the strategy that you do when you structure the script? And would you agree that writing is actually rewriting?
Writing is what?
Rewriting.
It's a little bit different from movie to movie. Sometimes, you know, and obviously adaptations are different. You have essentially the source material tells you what the story is, and that's more of an editing thing in a way. Because, but in terms of the stories that we write ourselves, it's different. But generally, it's a meander. You know, you kind of start at the beginning and you kind of stumble through it. We don't sort of sit down and make a structure and then try to make the story conform to that structure or think about it in terms of acts or anything like that. We kind of, as I say, you kind of stumble through it, and then at a certain point, as the outlines of it become clearer, it's a feedback process. You know, you go, oh, okay, well, then you start to try and impose a little bit more structure, or you get a picture more of what the structure is that's emerging. It's hard to explain, but I hope that sort of answers.
Can you elaborate a bit about your collaboration with Roger Deakins? I mean, concerning his way of contributing to the visual style, do you feel there's something different between working with him and with Barry Sonnenfeld, which you've seen in the clips? And when he's going to win an Academy Award? Because I thought not winning for True Grit was a real shame.
Yeah. No, I'm smiling because of the contrast between Barry Sonnenfeld, who you saw in the clips, as you say, who shot our first 3 movies, and Roger, who has done all of them subsequently except for one. Oh man, they're both, in terms of making the movie, collaborators like the two of us are collaborators. I mean, very close collaborators. the director of photography is just so much a part of how you know, the cameras, I mean, you know, it's how you, moving the camera or not, and the composition and the lighting is kind of what it's about. And they're very different in terms of
different personalities.
In terms of everything.
Yeah.
Actually, pretty much in terms of everything. Shooting style and lighting style and camera style and personality, and probably pretty much any other point you could raise. I don't even know how to begin. Barry used direct light and 1,000 fixtures, all very specific, and Roger uses more general bounce light, and Roger is much freer in terms of, Roger has a really interesting, he's very free in terms of moving the camera, partly because he's, it's like the techno crane. He basically always has the camera on a crane which he operates remote, a techno crane which he operates remote, which allows you to do compound moves, not just track in and out or boom up and down, but to basically go along any axis. And he has it's actually, it would be fascinating if we weren't so familiar with it. He has a kind of brain sync relationship with his dolly grip, who operates the techno crane and who has a little monitor and who can see what the composition is, which Roger establishes with the wheels. And it's really interesting to see the two of them both set up shots in terms of working out what the camera is going to do, which is a largely nonverbal process except for Roger swearing at the dolly grip. And doing successive takes where they're adjusting to what the actors are doing and what's going on. It's not at all, it's weird. I'm making it sound documentary, which it's not in the least, but it's a really fascinating and nuanced thing. It's not certainly not something improvised either. We talk about the shots beforehand with Roger, but it's a really interesting, subtle, nonverbal thing.
You know, it is, as Ethan said, it's not at all like documentaries, but Roger did start as a documentary filmmaker, and he is actually, and this is unusual with the sort of big lighting DPs who are sort of at the top of the heap in Hollywood movies. He's an extraordinary operator himself. That's not something you often see. So he always, as Ethan was saying, along with his dolly grip, he operates everything himself on all of the movies that he does. So there's that. As far as how we work with him, it depends a little bit on, it varies a little bit from movie to movie. Generally, we do a version of the storyboards. We sometimes then do another version of them with Roger, or at least parts of the movie with Roger. And sometimes, depending on his schedule, it's sort of like rehearsing with actors. You know, sometimes you get a lot of time with the actors ahead of time, and sometimes you don't. And then that's also been true in the many movies that we've done with Roger. Sometimes he's working on something and has very short pre-production with us, and sometimes he doesn't. It doesn't seem to, you know, it's a very like many of the other long collaborations we've had, it gets simpler and less verbal as the years in the movies go on. You just you learn how you can trust the other person, and a lot of it is unsaid, or a lot of it can be said very quickly. So, yeah, he's somebody that we have that kind of shorthand with at this point.
Again, the contrast with Barry is really interesting. Barry, everything was very not locked down. You could move the camera, but not in those compound moves. Everything had to be very choreographed, both because of the nature of how the camera was being moved, and also because of how it was being lit. The actors had to hit marks pretty precisely, because if they didn't, they'd miss their light. Not that that's, you know, it's just a totally different style of making movies. You also can't. Our favorite quote of Barry's, because we heard it on every setup, was, "You want me to pan?" you couldn't move the camera this much that way because if you did, you'd see a light stand. Again, it's just Roger is much more. His style is much more to adjust to what the actors are doing as opposed to dictating to the actors what they should be doing. Which actors are professional people and they can do it and they can hit marks, but it's just a different experience.
I'd like to ask, especially because you've made some genre films, what were your early film tastes? Which films inspired you to make your own?
What were our early film
tastes?
Oh. Well, I mean, if you go way back, as kids, we watched mostly films on television. And, people don't believe this, but they were things like Doris Day movies or bad Bob Hope comedies. It was, and then there was a film society at the University of Minnesota where we grew up that would bring in other kinds of things. But I think our early film education was mostly from films that we saw, mostly studio programmers that we saw on television, which probably accounts for the fact that we sort of temperamentally consider those were the sort of models for what we wanted to do. Ethan was saying we were pretty conventional or conservative in that respect. It probably sort of grew out of the fact that we were watching, really getting into Rock Hudson and Doris Day movies.
I wanted to ask, what is your favorite part in making a film?
Well, it's nice that it keeps changing. I mean, we sit in a room together and write for months at a time, which is stimulating for a while, and then, we get sick of each other, and you want to do something else just as relief, which is good because then you sort of graduate to production where you have the input of many, many more people, and it's much more collegial. But it's also, and again, can be fun for a while, but then it's actually very, can also be very stressful because that's where you're spending a lot of money and the pressure is accordingly, higher. And then we go back to sitting in a room, just the two of us and an assistant to cut the movie, and that's a relief at that point, just because, again, it is different from what we've been doing for the last 3 or 4 months, however long the shoot of the movie was. So I don't think either of us would pick one process that we wanted to do that would be our favorite, that we would want to do exclusively. The nature of the change over the course of the process of making the movie is part of what makes it keeps it stimulating.
Will you ever work apart?
No, not in terms of making movies, no.
Okay, I think they changed the light on us, but either way, we would like to give a lot of, much more chance for people to, so thank you for this panel, but now the floor is open for everybody.
Please remain seated if you want to grill the brothers. So, okay, our final session for today will be an open Q&A with Joel and Ethan Coen. We will now open the floor for questions. So please introduce yourself and ask your question. Who would like to be first? Yes, here. We'll give you the mic and then you can ask.
My name is Leah Van Leer. I'm the director of the Jerusalem Film Festival. Where we showed all your films on a big screen, and of course all your incredible, wonderful films were made in a society where you live in and you know. But wouldn't it be perhaps an extraordinary thing if you came to make a film in Jerusalem, the holy, unholy city of Jerusalem? Think about it.
The sound is on stage is very bad, so I'm not sure I heard, but was the question whether we would make a movie in Jerusalem?
The question was, first of all, you've made all these extraordinary, wonderful films in a society where you live and you know, in the United States. And I think it would be extraordinary if you came to Jerusalem and made a film in this unholy, holy city of Jerusalem. What do you think?
Well,
we're waiting.
Yes, no, in a way I would love to. My wife is always asking why I'm going to New Mexico. Why not set a movie in Tuscany? And I'm sure she would love to spend time in Jerusalem as well. The problem is you can only write the stories that you can write. And they all come out of essentially, we're American, and as Ethan said, that's been completely internalized to the point where the story, when we sit down to think of a story, is generally an American set story. It's possible, as happened with the case with the James Dickey novel, I suppose, which took place in Japan, that maybe someday somebody will give us something that's set elsewhere, including perhaps Israel, that appeals to us to the extent that we might find it, a place to make another movie. But as far as stories that we come up with ourselves, it's, I have to say, unlikely.
Yes, sir. Over there?
Hi, I'm Adam Krongold, director of Melbourne's Jewish Short Film Festival. First of all, it was a pleasure to hear you in person. I'm a big fan of horror and of comedy and sci-fi. You've done a lot of comedy. You intertwine a bit of horror, but sci-fi, perhaps?
I don't know. The floating zero gravity thing.
You can have like boots that keep you down,
boots,
but just
yeah, you could have the boots.
Yeah.
Then you got to have the big helmets.
Not your thing.
The deep sea diver, the can.
I'm sure you could make it good. I also have a small gift for you, just the short list of our films from the festival last year, and I'd be honored if you would accept it on our behalf.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You. The one with the glasses.
Thank you. I would like to continue the question about the adaptation of True Grit and forced adaptation in general. If you love the movie so much, the book so much, what advantage do you think the film medium have in conveying that story? In which way make me the film could lie the story in a different way? And another part of this question is, why do you, of course you have to change a few things, how do you decide what to change? And in True Grit, although it's pretty much based on the book, there are some very interesting changes in the plot-wise, and also Shmulik said it's a conservative film. I find it interesting that in the ending thing, the beginning, maybe you can call it political message that the Indian didn't have a sense to speak, opposed to the novel.
I'm not sure I understand the first part, but maybe I did. You can tell me if this answers your question. We chose to make a movie out of it, not just because we like the book, because there are lots of books you like that you would never think for a second about trying to make a movie out of, but because it had certain things, I don't even know the things you could itemize, certain imponderable things that you just feel, all right, not only is it a really good book, but somehow it would lend itself to, you could make a really good movie from it, something that would stand on its own as being, hopefully the ambition is to make a good movie that would communicate some of the feeling of the book, but still work as a movie. So whatever that weird kind of totally, I really think it is a totally like imponderable thing as impression as opposed to some mapped out thought process that leads you to believe, okay, you could make a movie out of this. That's what sort of guides you, decides you to adapt it as a movie or not. I don't know if that's responsive to the first part of the question or not, but... And the second part was about the differences, what differences there are in the movie and the book.
How did you decide what differences to make? And also, do you think film has advantages to literature in the way of showing things and not showing things or not telling things?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it's a question, often with novels, as I said before, it's a question of editing. You can't, a 2-hour movie, generally, this is a very, very short novel, there's much that gets left out. There's also, it's true that there were certain things in True Grit. They're small things, but they're significant that were changed in terms of the story. One of the main ones was just the fact that in the novel, the trio of Rooster, LaBeef, and Maddie are actually together the whole time that they're in the Indian Territory, and in the movie they separate, and that was. I mean, it was partly done as sort of a dramatic device. It was partly done, in terms of how LaBeef comes back into the story in the middle of that ambush. It was partly done in a way of letting the Maddie character spend more time. That'd be a sort of one-on-one thing between Maddie and the Rooster character for a certain portion of the movie. There were different sort of calculations that went into it, but that's true. I mean, things do change, and you try to sort of analyze it or write it in terms of what's going to sort of maximize the dramatic sort of potential of the material. So little things changed like that. And then the last part of the question was about the Indian who doesn't get to speak?
It's an observation about maybe the film is not as much as conservative as it might be seen. Could be.
Well, but it was also, I think, just a reflection of, that's probably pretty much the way it would happen at that time.
I have a question here. I have two questions. Hello?
Yeah, over there.
Hi, my name is Daphne, and I'm a student here. And I was wondering whether you could elaborate on the thought process you go through from the moment an idea for a movie sparks your imagination and until you start production.
Well, you write it, then you go through a long period of pre-production, which is generally involved, in our case, with a combination, this often happens simultaneously, of scouting the locations that you're going to shoot the movie in and storyboarding the movie. The storyboarding has been talked about a little bit, but generally we storyboard the whole film. We don't, interestingly, actually look at the storyboards much once we start shooting the movie. And large parts of the movie don't necessarily even conform to the storyboards. But in a strange way, it's another draft of the movie before we actually go into production for us, and it helps us to sort of crystallize our thinking or have a place of sort of a point of departure from the point of view of the sort of visual plan of the movie before we actually do go into production. So certain sequences conform pretty closely to what we storyboard, and others not so much.
a difficulty in talking about the process is it all gets very mushed together and happens in arbitrary ways in terms of schedule and everything. When we're storyboarding, we may or may not also be scouting for locations, which is a huge part of a huge determining thing in how the movie looks, and that may or may not influence how we think scenes can be staged or should be staged, and that influences how you kind of plan the movie in terms of storyboards. So you kind of storyboard in reaction to a location you've found, or you revise if you find the location later, or you might even actually there have been instances where we've added little scenes just in response to finding locations. So in a sense, you know, the script writing interacts with the location scouting process, and you're also casting sometimes smaller parts of this at the same time, and things react to other things that are going on, and it's kind of a mush of activity that doesn't make a lot of ordered sense, and that explains the movie.
Yes, over there, please.
I have two questions. One, why do you have so much violence in your movies? That's question number one. And question number two is your movie, The Serious Man, was the first movie with a Jewish, relationship. Your relationship to Judaism is this a theme you're going to continue, or?
Is it a theme we're going to continue? I don't know.
Explore Woody Allen kind of thing.
It's a theme that it's funny. We decided to make a movie that was we made two movies that were set in the area that we grew up in. One of them is Fargo, which, we wanted to do a sort of specific crime story, and we were interested in the sort of the Scandinavian inflection of that area that we grew up in, and that we observed sort of as quasi-outsiders being in the Jewish community when we lived in Minnesota. It's just part of who we are and where we grew up, and it was interesting, as we've said many times, it's just what you internalize and where your stories come from. The second one was The Serious Man, and as I said, we grew up in a Jewish community there, and what that was about was the desire to tell a story within the context of that Jewish community that we grew up in. So it's not as if we sort of sat down and said, well, we're going to consciously explore a Jewish theme in the movie. We are Jewish. That's where we grew up. That's the story that came out in sort of thinking about that context. I don't think we have any plans to make another movie about the Jewish community in Minneapolis.
And the second question, the violence in your movies? Is that part of your...
The second question, I don't know how to answer that one.
You seem like such a nice, sweet guy.
Well, I'm sorry? We seem like such nice people. Well, I guess the only way to answer that, we were at a symposium much like this about 2 years ago for No Country for Old Men. It was moderated by a friend of ours, a film director named Noah Baumbach, who made The Squid and the Whale and many other really interesting movies. And someone asked the question, they stood up in the back and they said, why in a world that's so bleak and so violent do you have to make such violent movies? And Noah turned to us and said, I think the question is, why have you made a movie that so much reflects the times that we live in?
Someone up there, yeah. You get the chance. Yeah, very high over there. Yeah, you. You choose. You'll have to fight on it. The mic, yeah.
It's a very short question. I'm just a physicist and a film lover. I'm not a professional. I just want to ask you if you saw the Chinese adaptation of your movie, Blood Simple, by the director Zhang Yimou. And if you saw it, what did you think of it?
We did see it. It wasn't quite finished when we saw it. Zhang Yimou was kind enough to let us see it, but it was nearly finished. I really enjoyed it. For us, it was mind-bending because in a way it was totally familiar and totally, by virtue of the setting, unfamiliar. It was flattering because we both love his movies. It was just a strange, interesting experience. We couldn't react to it like a normal audience would because just because of its genesis. It was weird and enjoyable.
Yeah, you over there with the black shorts. Yeah, you and the glasses. Wait for the mic, I guess. Wait for the mic.
My question is this. Many of your movies are influenced by film noir, starting with Blood Simple onwards, both visually and narratively. So what I wanted to ask was what attracted you in film noir, what draws you to it again and again in your movies?
I think actually a large part of the answer has nothing to do with film noir or film genre or film at all, but we've always liked American kind of pulp fiction, hard-boiled fiction, the kind of fiction that was the basis for many of those movies that we think of as film noir. We both always liked the novels of Dashiell Hammett, and basically Miller's Crossing is a complete rip-off of Hammett's story. And Raymond Chandler and The Big Lebowski is kind of not a rip-off of Raymond Chandler, but very much reminiscent of him. And James M. Cain. That's really the short answer to the question. We really like those and a few other novelists who work in that genre as opposed to the film genre.
You.
Hi. A short question about the music of the films. Sometimes the music is adjusted to the film, like Big Lebowski, but sometimes the film is adjusted to the music, or it is the music itself, like in Oh Brother. How do you choose the music? Many times I find myself coming back to the movie just to hear the music again.
It depends on the movie, of course. I mean, as far as the underscoring is concerned, every movie that we've done has been with underscoring has been done by Carter Burwell, from Blood Simple to True Grit, and that also varies. I mean, sometimes there's an idea that's sort of driving what the music is going to be, even when we're writing the script and when we're in production on the movie. That was, I think, the case in The Man Who Wasn't There. We used a lot of Beethoven, but I think Carter was also starting to think about the score that he was doing in that context early on. Other times, he doesn't even start to think about it until he sees a rough cut of the movie, and we don't even necessarily know what direction we want it to take.
Yeah, our input varies movie to movie from a lot to none. In terms of talking about giving Carter ideas or telling Carter what we've been thinking about, I think specifically The Man Who Wasn't There, A Serious Man, that was an instance where we didn't think of. We had no ideas. We weren't thinking about it at all as we were making the movie, and we just showed the movie to Carter and said, we're stumped. What do you think? He came up with something that was kind of I think it was great. It was kind of a little modernist, spare, repetitive thing. Then in other instances, we'll talk to Carter specifically suggesting, and sometimes he takes up the suggestion because it works and sometimes not. In the case of the last one, True Grit, we suggested, because of the nature of the main character and the story itself being very, Protestant, that the score be based on Protestant hymns. which we tried and which did work well. And sometimes we suggest things to Carter and we all agree that it's the right thing, and he comes back to us and he says, we all agreed it should be X, but in fact, I tried this, which is, totally different, Y, and it seems to work well, and, he's always right.
And then, the other category is the movies that we've done with T-Bone Burnett, and those are generally, you mentioned Oh Brother, The Big Lebowski. The movie that we're doing next probably will be in the same sort of kind of movie in terms of music. It's sort of musically driven, but it's all music that you see in the movie or it's source music. And that's a different thing. That's, we came in Oh Brother, we we had from the beginning an idea of the musical element in it, and certain parts of that music are music that was written into the script, and certain parts of it were things that T-Bone brought to us. That was the case both in Oh Brother and in The Big Lebowski. So.
Yeah, you.
Hi. There was one question I wanted to specifically refer to Joel, actually. What happened to your leg?
It's a accident on a motor scooter.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah, the one that's jumping. Yeah.
First of all, I would like to say welcome to Israel. Thank you very much. Actually, my question is about location, because you say you film in many different locations in Minnesota and some other places. I'm actually a struggling actor from LA and also a struggling actor here. So I was wondering how I can be in your next film, since location's not the problem. And the other thing is I'm actually more of a struggling student. I don't know if you guys have seen the tuition fees here. So how do I get into your next film? I'd like to work with you.
Okay, next question.
There's no answer for that one?
They're smiling, I guess.
Yes, hi.
I'm
here.
serious.
Okay.
Here.
I can't see you, but
hello?
ask.
Here. Can you hear
Yes.
me? Hi. Hi. My name is Virginia Di Marco. I work for the Italian National News Agency, and I want to ask you, what do you think about the Italian cinema today, and which is the last Italian film that you watched? Maybe Abemus Papam or something like this?
The last Italian film we saw was Paolo Sorrentino's new movie called This Must Be the Place. I think that's what they're releasing it under. Yeah, the new Paolo Sorrentino movie, which is, I think, playing in Cannes. I don't know if it's played in Cannes yet, which is very interesting. So that's the last one we saw. Hasn't even been released yet. We love Italian movies. Everybody loves Italian movies.
Okay, that's all the time we have. Thank you very much. We hope you enjoyed it. Thank you, Ethan.